Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Sharp DFS Analysis here on RotoGrinders.com. My name is Chris Gimino, wishing you a happy holidays. Whatever you're celebrating this upcoming weekend, just find a way to celebrate something. I'm looking forward to the NFL action here in Week 16. We are going to be breaking it down from a Vegas and advanced analytics standpoint. And joining me to go over this, as we've had for the past 15 weeks, we've got Chris Raybon and Warren Sharp. Chris, what's going on today?
What's up, guys? Happy holidays to everybody. Try to give you guys some tips to help you guys out so you can spend your time doing more important things like being with family, shopping, and celebrating.
Amen. We are getting ready for all kinds of good things to happen this upcoming weekend, NFL included. Warren, I know you're getting excited for all the above. What's happening, man?
Yeah, definitely. This weekend is tricky because not all the time I don't think they'll ever play games like a full slate of games on Christmas Day, even if it falls on a Sunday. They move those games to a Saturday. But it's always tricky. I mean, a lot of, obviously, it goes without saying, like a lot of people do celebrate Christmas. And so this is Christmas Eve. There's a lot of different things that are going to be going on in people's lives. So actually, a lot of the sharper groups get down on these games a little bit earlier. There's this conception that, like they're always waiting till the last second to do it. But, they want to do some things too with their families and that sort of thing. So a lot of times anytime that you have like odd things happening with the calendar, like Sunday NFL games over in London that start at 9:30, like it's not just the guys getting up and betting that game early. It's still moving on all the different games because they just want to get in, get their work done. They have guys helping them out and that sort of thing. It's not just a one-man crew. And so they want to get all coordinated on the same page and get it done and then move on. And so the same sort of thing happens when you've got this full slate on Christmas Eve as well.
Yeah, and that's going to be going on with the people who are making their DFS lineups this weekend too. A little bit different of a schedule for even the sharper guys out there. Everyone's dealing with family situations. So, not too much to keep in mind there other than, this is a week where you can capitalize on your research maybe a little bit more than usual if you maintain, some sort of an edge as far as making sure you get it done the way you might normally do it versus trying to take a little bit of a break. Just make sure you get it done this weekend. Now, when we talk about strategy this week, I want to talk about something that you just hit on when you talk about sharp betting groups and what they're up to with their money on a week-to-week basis. Basically, their decisions sway the total dollars on a betting line so much that you could see situations where there might be more tickets on one side of the coin than actual money. The sharp betting groups may actually have a sharp side to a game. Doesn't always occur, but we want to fade that public situation. We want to fade those situations where the public is heavy on a game, but the sharps are actually on the other side. We want to basically try to be on the same side as the sharps. So there's a lot of misconceptions in what I just said alone, Warren, and I'm going to throw it to you to try to clean this up a little bit. When I say public side versus sharp side, can we actually know what the sharp side is? Who are the sharps, and when is it actually possible for us to know which side is the sharper side when it comes to a betting line?
It's tricky. This is definitely something that I think this show in particular has been helpful for the guys in the DFS market because a lot of the guys in the DFS market aren't nearly as connected in the sports betting market and having access to the groups and the people in the groups and the accounts that they bet into and things of that nature. So that's what we're trying to do is share some of that information. Just a couple of misconceptions off the top. There's not always a sharp or a square. There's always tends to be a square side to a game. But that doesn't mean the sharp guys get involved in every single game, number one. Number two, there's always a conception that the sharp guys or groups are obviously getting involved on these games and you could see where they are. Like you could tell where they are on these games. And that's also not necessarily true. There's some cases that it's pretty evident, like it's difficult to mask that. We in our production meeting, we just discussed the Tampa Bay Atlanta game on Monday night. That was a game this past week where, the public sides were cashing in the majority of the day on Sunday, like they have been a lot later on this season. And you knew that the sharp books are going to need Tampa Bay to come through because they're getting so much public action. Again, these guys, when the public wins, they tend to keep betting and they keep rolling it over. So, and they bet mostly favorites. And so you see the line shaded a little bit more towards the favorites. And in that case, that line was 6.5, then it went up to 7, and there were some 7.5s out there even. And definitely the sharp side in that game was Tampa Bay. And, it doesn't take much difficulty to look at like some of the public bet percentages or something and see that, the public side clearly is the Atlanta Falcons here. But a lot of the times the groups are going to, you're not just going to be able to see, like there's a conception that reverse line movement is the obvious indicator. So I'll give you here's a perfect game for this week. Okay. Jacksonville, San Francisco. If you look at where that line opened, there were some 5.5s out in Vegas when it opened, 5s offshore, and that line got bet down all the way down to 4. And there's some groups that are actually on San Francisco in this game. They took the underdog plus 4.5 or plus 4. But then you just saw this morning that money came in on the Jacksonville Jaguars and pushed that line, while there's a couple 4s, mostly back up to 4.5. That is movement from a different group. So you got sharp guys on opposite sides of the games, sharp groups, I should say, on opposite side of the game. So it is tricky just to look at the screen and try to always know where the sharp money is. By screen, I mean like an odds screen. So you don't want to just look at, here's one easy free tip. You don't want to just go to like whatever site that you bet at and just look at their lines and then just like come back like half a day later and see if that line has moved. Like you can go to like sharpfootballanalysis.com where there's free services elsewhere where you could see the live lines page and you can see what the line opened at and where it is now, and you can compare it across a number of books. You could also click on any single game, like a particular line, and you could see what the line history is for that. That's what I mean by screen. Just by looking at the screen, you're not always going to be able to tell, but there are some cases, like I said, caveating it, that there are some cases that you can tell based on looking at the screen, but it does get trickier and trickier to try to figure out, if you don't have access to information, talk to anybody who has information, exactly what the sharp side is, unless you use some of your own intuition. Like you guys probably know who the most popular teams are. I mean, I get contacted sometimes by a guy who is like, has no connections. He just started betting a little while ago. And he's like, man, I really like, the Rams look so great this week. Like the Rams, laying 6.5, they look like a surefire. There's so many problems with Tennessee and everybody's down in Tennessee. Like the Rams look like a slam dunk here. I basically just messaged him back right away. And this was like, I think like Sunday night or Monday. I was like, I can tell you what, like the books are going to need Tennessee here. That's definitely going to be the side that the books need. I'm not on the game in any way, shape, or form. I told him, like, I'm not advocating for the Rams. I'm not advocating for the Titans. I'm just telling you that when a game looks too good to be true, then it very well could be. And it doesn't take me telling you guys to know that after what the Rams did in Seattle with such a huge final score and shutting them down, that the public is not going to be all over the Rams and fading the Tennessee Titans at home and taking anything underneath of a touchdown. And that line is down to actually 6.5 plus 100. So it's even money at a really sharp book called Pinnacle right now, which means that, betting 100 wins you 100. They're asking for money to come in on the LA Rams because all the other lines are juiced up if you want to bet on the Rams right now. So we'll see where this goes from here and if any groups end up getting back on the Rams like later in the weekend. But as of right now, like it's pretty definite that that's a defined sharp versus square game right there.
Okay, so one more question, since we're probably more concerned about the totals and how the flow of the game is going to go in DFS. When you see that there is a pretty defined sharp side, if you're able to discern that information, do you find this to be an effective indicator sometimes, all the time? I mean, would you say that when you see this sort of a situation arising, that it's worth your time going to investigate deeper if, say, you don't have the time to research as deeply as a Warren Sharp does?
It's worth their time to do what?
So just dive deeper into the matchup, try to understand why the sharps might be on that side.
Okay. Yeah, definitely. I think anytime that you see information comes across that, that affects the line that you didn't think or anticipate was going to happen, you do need to take a closer look at it. Like, am I missing a key injury here? Is there some type of like a matchup that I just wasn't considering? Is a player returning? Is a coach talking about something this past week that, may not have been noteworthy, newsworthy, like prior to this time, but they're going to change up some sort of a strategy or something like that? And so absolutely, any point in time that there's a line move or something that indicates like, hey, this is like taking what looks like to me to be taking some sharp money, and I was looking at the other side. Absolutely. I mean, whether or not you can confirm that that's sharp money, like most people out there probably can't confirm it, but you think it looks like it, like there's definitely some reverse line movement here. You may want to take a closer look at that. Doesn't necessarily mean that like, okay, in this game, the Rams versus the Titans, right? Like if you're looking at the total and you're thinking, well, I want a lot of points here because I want to focus on Todd Gurley and some of the Rams, or I want to focus on Goff or something like that. And you see money coming in on Tennessee and the under. It doesn't necessarily mean that like Jared Goff can't have a good day here, or you should change your whole philosophy. But you should definitely dig deeper into it and think about what could happen if things don't play out the way that I was thinking. Like, what could derail this? And that's one of the things I always advocate people to do, is just think like negatively about what they're looking to do. Think about, first and foremost, the way you already know in your mind what you want to do based on what you've seen. Like we talked about all the biases that come into play on our last show or 2 shows ago. You already kind of know what you might want to do. Like one of the first things that you should do after you like already understand, like, this is what I'm thinking, think about what could go wrong with that idea. Think about the negative things how could this be derailed? How could this get screwed up? And if you can kind of argue against a lot of those things, then I would keep sticking with what you wanted to do. But if you see a lot of things that are causing you distress and like, oh, well, yeah, maybe this could be bad. I wonder what the likelihood of that actually happening is, and do a little bit of digging, then you may want to change your mind. It's not something that's like hard and fast that happens all the time. You definitely need to kind of take it on a case-by-case basis.
Yeah, it's just interesting. I hear a lot of people say things like, well, Vegas is trying to tell us something. And I think, that helps us try to maybe clear up a little bit that there's a little bit more to it. There's no universal axiom as far as looking at sharp side versus public side. But it's interesting to think about when you look at what the betting lines are trying to tell us, if they're trying to tell us anything at all. And in most cases, it's a little bit more complicated than they're definitely telling us something all the time. Chris, when we talk about projected ownership, though, that's kind of the way that we measure the sharp side in DFS. What are we projecting their ownership at? What do they actually end up being owned in both sharp contests and low stakes contests? So those high stakes contests generally going to show us what the sharp side truly was. Lower stakes contests are going to tell us maybe where the gap is, where the public plays were that weren't necessarily as sharp. So when you take a look at something like projected ownership, how do you kind of use this beforehand to determine, where you think you can get an advantage on the field, and also after the fact to determine where the sharp side may have truly lied?
I think with projected ownership, what you're really trying to compare is, how much ownership is this player going to have, and how does that compare to what his probability is of that ownership paying off? So that's why I created a metric called GPP leverage score, which essentially does that by it looks at all of the players at the position in a given week, because that's something that's not talked about enough with projected ownership, is that, well, a player's ownership could be projected highly, but if there's no viable alternative, then it doesn't make any sense really to fade a particular player in a situation, in a good situation, no less, if there's not a real viable alternative. So what GPP leverage scores do is they take stock of all of the ownership for a particular position, and they look at the likelihood of all the players at that position hitting value, and then it comes up with a score where 1 is average and over 1 is positive. That means that you have an advantage there. There's some leverage there. That means that a player's ownership is projected to be lower than his probability of hitting value. So what I like to really use it in terms of wide receivers, because that's where there's so many alternatives, yet the ownership will still be concentrated on, there's always going to be a few wide receivers that are going to be probably pushing 20% ownership or higher. And then there's going to be another half dozen, somewhere in that range that are going to probably have double-digit ownership. But that's still only accounting for maybe half of the wide receivers, especially on a main slate. So, half of the number one wide receivers, that is. So you still have all these other wide receivers that are going to have single-digit ownership, that are going to be under-owned. And essentially, if a player's probability of hitting GPP value, let's just say, is 10%, and he is projected to be owned only 5%, well, then you have some leverage there. So I went back and looked at the DraftKings Millionaire Maker winning lineups just to give you a sense of how this all works. And it turns out that for wide receivers, 40% of them had GPP leverage scores above 1, and then 60% had under 1. So what that's telling you is, yeah, you still need to have some of those high value plays in there, those plays that are projected for high ownership. You don't want to just go completely away from that, but you usually need at least one play that's going to have lower ownership and going to give you some leverage in a particular lineup. And that's what's going to differentiate you. So last week, for example, Keelan Cole had a leverage score of 1.66, which is very good. He turned out to be in the winning lineup. You had Alshon Jeffrey, even though he only had 14.3 DraftKings points, he ended up in the winning lineup. He had a GPP leverage score just over 1. And, these things could kind of just tell you, okay, where are the situations where I'm getting some value? It's the same thing as looking for value with projected points. Okay, projected points versus salary. This player is giving me value. This makes him a good player. Well, in the same way, you can look at, okay, well, this player is projected for a certain amount of points, a certain amount of value, and a certain amount of ownership, and I can get value that way. So a lot of times it'll point out guys who they're not in a great matchup or anything like that. They're just not in a bad matchup either, but they're just going overlooked, because there's a lot of players in this league that are good players that a tough matchup isn't necessarily going to stop them. Like we see Doug Baldwin, he's a good player. Yeah, he'll have quiet games, but there's also no cornerbacks necessarily that can just shut him down either. So there's nothing really stopping him from having a good game. So you'll see him a lot of times pop up with a leverage score above 1. Somebody like Golden Tate, who in a given week usually doesn't get that much ownership unless it's like a really obvious spot. But Golden Tate's another player. Every week he's liable to go off. I mean, he's a good player. And you just kind of looking for things like that is what really gives you an edge. It's not about just fading all of the chalk or only going contrarian or never going contrarian. It's kind of just that balance of finding the situations where you can go off the map and off the board a little bit and still get positive expected value.
Yeah, good stuff there on projected ownership and how to leverage that ownership, because like you said, it's not always a matter of just simply fading high ownership. If you faded a guy like Drake last week, he probably didn't pay off too well. All of his pivots didn't necessarily come through for you. He came through with a nice score. So again, it's not always about taking the opposite side of high ownership. It's about figuring out where you need to come off that high ownership in favor of a lower owned pivot with a high leverage situation. More value projected than his ownership implies. Let's get on to the games, guys. There's a lot to talk about this week. We got plenty of strategy crammed in there. So let's go ahead and talk about the high total games first. We've got Atlanta, New Orleans, Seattle, and Dallas, Oakland, Philadelphia as the highest total games worth discussing. Lowest total games, the Giants, Arizona, Denver, Washington, Cleveland, Chicago, Minnesota, Green Bay. Of all of those totals, Warren, where's one where we might find a situation where Vegas might not have it exactly correct?
Well, one that I'm looking at is this Cowboys Seahawks game. I think when Ezekiel Elliott left, Vegas clearly didn't understand how to account properly enough for him. And of course, Tyron Smith being out this week is a big loss for that offensive line. But I still think that you have to make larger adjustments for his presence being back there. And there's a few different ways we can break this game down. But first of all, one of the biggest things that Dallas has struggled with without Ezekiel Elliott being there. They're actually not that bad in terms of success rate running the football. Like they're second best in the NFL over the last month. They're doing a great job of having successful gains on the ground. But what those successful gains aren't doing is being explosive. They are very poor with explosive runs with Ezekiel Elliott not being there. Whereas, of course, when he was there, their explosive run rate was significantly higher. So that's first and foremost. And then you look at the matchup that they've got and what Seattle allowed last week to Todd Gurley, of course. There are things to look forward to with regard to Ezekiel Elliott's presence, giving them this upside in terms of larger, more explosive runs. Then you have the element of running back passes out of the backfield. And that's one of the things that, forget about it. Like without Ezekiel Elliott there, the Dallas Cowboys struggled immensely with throwing the football to their starting running back and just having him be very productive in space. And obviously that's one of the things that Dallas is going to have now with Ezekiel Elliott back there. I mean, this team currently ranks 31st in the league in running back pass success rates, success rate on passes to their running backs. And a large part of that was because of Ezekiel Elliott not being there. And so when you put him back in there, instantly what happens is you've got a massive security blanket for Dak Prescott when he drops back and needs to throw the football. And it's not just that, oh, hey, there's a guy here who can catch the ball, but it's that this is a viable option for me to throw the ball to this guy for us to gain a first down or have a successful play. Whereas without Zeke there, it was, oh, here's my dump pass auxiliary, but I'm really trying to push it down there because I know we're not going to get much if I throw the ball to this guy. So what should happen is a confidence boost for Dak Prescott, who really hasn't played all that great. And then you've got the matchup edges in the passing game, which once the Legion of Boom went out, I mean, that was the main talking point about Seattle was their pass defense, allowing tons of explosive plays. And we only saw a little bit of that because the Rams had such a strong run game last week. But if you look at what the Jacksonville Jaguars were able to do to them a couple weeks ago, even the Philadelphia Eagles had some success. They only scored 10 points because they fumbled the ball away and screwed themselves a lot in that game out in Seattle. But Atlanta did it to them as well back in Week 11. On the flip side of things, let's talk about the Seattle Seahawks offense here. And look, they have not been very successful. They've been allowing a ton of pressure, but there's a couple things they have going for them as well. Number one, Dallas has recorded 0 sacks in 4 out of their last five games. That's a nice stat. I heard Evan Silva share. So that's big. Number two, you've got the fact that Seattle, they haven't really been very successful over the last month of the season in terms of what they've been doing offensively. But there's two things to take into consideration. Number one, they played a brutal schedule of opposing defenses, the Eagles, the Jaguars, and the Rams. So that's very, very difficult schedule there. And number two, while they haven't been as successful in terms of their success rate, they've been very explosive. They're actually, I want to say, the number 2 most explosive run team and the number 4 most explosive pass team over the last 4 weeks of the season. So they've been very explosive. A lot of their pass attempts or run attempts are gaining big yardage. They're just not very consistent. Well, one of the things that Dallas tries to do defensively is to limit those big plays. But they've been fortunate in that they've played some teams that, again, this is where the trending data comes into play. If you look at the teams that they've played the last 3 weeks, I mean, at the start of the season, you could say, oh, yeah, the Redskins, great. The Raiders, great. And the Giants, maybe they'll be good too this year with all of their players. But if you look at what these teams have been the last 4 weeks, terrible and explosive run offense, terrible and explosive pass offense. I mean, the Redskins can't field a running back. The Giants have no wide receivers. The Redskins, the only thing they've got going for them besides old Vernon Davis, who's still, chugging along, is Jamison Crowder. Apart from that, there's no consistency in that pass game. And we know the struggles that Derek Carr's having himself, his receivers trying to get on the field and stay healthy. The last 3 games that they've played have been against teams that are completely no longer explosive whatsoever. I mean, the Redskins used to be the number 1 most explosive offense in the NFL. Over the last month, they're like down at 26. I mean, it's just terrible, but injuries along the line. And this time of the year, that's why you have to look at, more recent trending stuff. Seattle could do pretty well as long as they give Russell Wilson a little bit of time. And that's the other benefit is like compared to a lot of these guys that Dallas has faced, it hasn't faced very many running quarterbacks. I mean, if you remember that when they played Alex Smith, we thought that Alex would run the ball a little bit more and have some success. Alex didn't really run it all that much, but he ran it a couple times and had some nice runs there. But apart from that, they really – Carson Wentz was very mobile, put up 37 points against them. Yeah, other than that, they're playing tons of pocket passing quarterbacks. So I think that there's an upside there for Wilson, not just running the ball, but also escaping the pocket to generate some of these more explosive plays. It's going to come down to, can these teams score touchdowns? Because I don't have a lot of confidence in Seattle's field goal kicker. This is a game that both teams realistically are probably knocked out of the postseason, but they still have a little bit of hope, so they're still going to be playing for it. So I expect whichever team gets down early to be a lot more aggressive. We see Seattle, this is notorious, when Seattle goes on the road, they don't score much in the first half. Like they're for whatever reason, like I've talked to some guys out there in Seattle closely associated with the team, and they don't get explosive plays early. They're not generating explosive passes. They don't attempt as many as they do at home, and it's a definite, it's real. It's not just talking about it. But in this spot, I mean, they're going to have to do that because they cannot afford to get down on Dallas and let Zeke just run the ball and churn out the clock and wear things down in the second half. So I think Seattle absolutely must place a focus on trying to come out aggressive early in this game.
I think the Dallas run game will be the heaviest owned portion in terms of DFS ownership. You will see Zeke Elliott on DraftKings be one of the top 2 highest run running backs in my estimation right now. So that's a situation where I would probably be fine going with the chalk if you are so inclined. As far as the Seattle side, I actually expect them to be somewhat under-owned after their recent performances. So if Warren is correct, this game goes over to the total. Could be some value in GPP tournaments on the Seattle side. Chris, who do you got as far as a team that the Vegas total may not be exactly as you see it?
I think this Carolina-Tampa Bay game, the total is a little low. It's around 46 and a half. But if you take a look at what these teams have been doing over the past 5 games, the Carolina Panthers and their opponents over the last 5 weeks on average combined for 58 points. The Panthers have been over 30 points in 4 of their last 5 games, but their opponents have also been over 21 or more in each of their last 5 games as well. So you have a situation where the Panthers are scoring a lot of points, they're giving up a lot of points, and just playing in a bunch of high-scoring games. And then the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, to a lesser extent, the same thing is happening over their last 5 games. Them and the opponent combines for 48 points on average, and Tampa Bay's been over 20. They've been at 20 or more in each of their last 5 games, and their opponents have been at 20 or more in their last 5 games as well. So there's 10 combined games where neither Tampa Bay or Carolina or their opponents have scored fewer than 20 points, and this could be another one of those games where Carolina's offense clicking on all cylinders. We talk a lot about Tampa Bay and how much their defense struggles when they go on the road, and they are on the road in this game. They're allowing a league-high 30.3 points per game on the road. That's compared to 17.7 at home. So large discrepancy there for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers going on the road. And you look at somebody like Jameis Winston, and in the 9 games that he's finished, he's been at 270 yards in 7 of them, and he's thrown multiple touchdowns in 6 of them. So Jameis Winston has kind of put up a bunch of numbers and yardage in games because Tampa Bay's defense has been so bad that he's had to throw for a large portion of the game. You're going to have some players still out for Carolina. You're going to have Thomas Davis missing the game. Tampa Bay has been able to run the ball better. They're actually 3rd in run success rate over the last 3 weeks, coinciding with benching Doug Martin. So I think Tampa Bay can still have some success, even though Deshaun Jackson's probably not going to play in this game. And we already know Carolina, I don't have to talk too much about that. Cam Newton's clicking. He's running the ball over double-digit. He averages double-digit attempts over the last 4 weeks. That's really helping that offense. Greg Olsen came back with 116 yards last week. That's also going to help the offense. Damiere Byrd coming on strong. So just a lot of avenues for the Panthers to continue to have success on offense, and they've been giving it right back. I mean, you look at some of the teams that have kind of done well against them. I mean, the Miami Dolphins, the Panthers and Dolphins combined for 66 total points, with the Dolphins still putting up 21 in a loss. The Jets scored 27 on Carolina. So, there's definitely some potential here for a higher scoring game than I think the Vegas spread indicates.
Yep, going to be some value on both sides of the ball too. You could consider some unconventional stacks if you wanted to go with a Cam plus McCaffrey. If you're out there stacking in DFS world, you could go with Mike Evans, who was being targeted down the field a little bit more last week than we had seen. His ADOT 18.1 last week as opposed to a season average of 13.7. You're looking at maybe Chris Godwin going to be in the mix here if Deshaun Jackson is indeed out for the game. So there's going to be some potential in DFS for us to stack this game if we want to get some correlations going. Obviously, there's some individual pieces you can use in cash games. I think a lot of people will run it right back with Cam Newton, expect to be one of the most popular quarterbacks on the week. So I like the idea of this game being one that we can target for DFS purposes, and we'll, in all likelihood, go over the total if we are correct about our analysis on the defense is struggling more than the line suggests. Now let's take a look at some other aspects of the Vegas betting lines here. Let's take a look at some of these big favorites that are out there. We've got Baltimore. We've got Minnesota. We've got Los Angeles Chargers, Los Angeles Rams, Carolina, Chicago, Kansas City, New England, Pittsburgh, and Oakland. Look at one of these weeks where we don't have a lot of close spreads. It's Detroit and Cincinnati and pretty much nobody else. So, Warren, when you take a look at all these spreads out there, where are we looking and saying, I'm not so sure about this, that we either think a favorite could struggle, an underdog could succeed? What looks interesting to you from the spread perspective?
Yeah, it's an interesting week because, as I kind of indicated at the top, anytime favorites do really well, which they did last week, of course, and they've been on a pretty good trend, the guys, the public guys, who public bettors, they're betting 20, 50, $100 a game. They're not moving the line, but collectively, like if all of them are getting involved on games and this time of year, they're betting a lot on favorites who are in must-win situations. I mean, that can skew the lines and add a little bit of line value in some cases. And so you're seeing a lot of large favorites this week. And most of them, I would say, are skewed slightly towards the favorite being in the must-win situation. One of the teams that I think is in a really good position, even though they don't have their starting quarterback back there because they lost Josh McCown, is the New York Jets. They're playing at home on Christmas Eve. They're hosting the LA Chargers, who are in LA, so they're traveling across the country for an early kickoff game. And the Jets are playing, and they're playing hard. Even with Bryce Petty in there, a lot of times, and this is where you can see, well, is a team trying for the coach or not? A lot of times when a starting quarterback goes out and the team's going to be really struggling late in the season, they lose their best quarterback, the team could easily fold up. I mean, they lost 23-0 against Denver in Denver back in Week 14. Bryce Petty starts against the Saints on the road, and that game is a close, lower-scoring game, and the Jets are able to put up 19 points on the road, put up a valiant effort there. After back-to-back road games in arguably two of the most difficult places to play football, you talk about Mile High out in Denver for a team on the East Coast, and then you talk about, down in New Orleans in that dome when the Saints have a winning record and are playing well. Those are two very difficult spots to play. The last we saw the Jets at home, they beat the Kansas City Chiefs 38-31, and they should have beaten the Carolina Panthers before a couple late scores by Carolina on a punt return and a fumble return. So a couple of non-offensive touchdowns there. But they still put up 27 points there. The Chargers, difficult situation for them. They lost last week, got kind of steamrolled a little bit by the Kansas City Chiefs late in that game. And most importantly, they sustained a number of injuries. Myself, looking at the Chargers for their win total and futures this year, I was keenly aware of one of their best players on defense who went out in the preseason, and that's Denzel Perryman. He's their kind of quarterback of the defense. He has the green dot. He calls out the plays. He got hurt in the preseason, missed most of the first half of the season, but came back, and the run defense did improve for a little while he was there. He went out in this last game, as did Corey Liuget, and this run defense definitely fell apart a little bit, and Kareem Hunt, took advantage of that. The Jets are a team that wants to run the football, and I think the Chargers are now a team that they can actually run the football on and have some success and control the pace of this game a little bit. Then you got Phillip Rivers, who, look, I love the guy, but he is the biggest double agent wild card that there is in the NFL right now. And he lost Hunter Henry, who's like one of his doesn't target him enough, in my opinion. I've gone on record saying this. I mean, the numbers bear that out, but he's one of their most efficient receivers. If you think they're going to do anything but like focus in on Keenan Allen here from a Phillip Rivers perspective, I don't know what to tell you. They also lost Austin Eckler, the running back, who was like their change of pace guy who could catch balls out of the backfield. So, I mean, Melvin Gordon is going to take a ton of workload here. He's probably going to have a number of first downs that don't work out for him. It's not that he's going to have a bad game overall through volume and through like one or two big runs here or there or a nice catch out of the backfield. I think he's going to produce a decent game here, but from a fantasy perspective. But to me, it's going to be like a two-man show. It's going to be a ton of Melvin Gordon and a ton of Keenan Allen. And the Jets can figure out how to make that damage not be quite as much as it would be had some of these other players been there and been getting touches and balanced out the offense a little bit. So I think there was some value there. You could still grab some sevens on the Jets, which would be my recommendation to do if you're looking for a little bit of an underdog. It's not a slam dunk. I mean, look, at this time of year, so many things play into it, factor into it, especially right around the Christmas break, that I never really go wild with like a high volume of plays this time of the year because it's like the preseason, as you guys know. I mean, you're handicapping motivation, coaching strategy. Are they going to try players out? What do they need to do? Like, the Chargers are in a must-win situation, but after a massive letdown, their playoff percentage is unlikely. If they get down a little bit early or don't have a great start, Phillip Rivers could easily start chucking interceptions out of desperation. I mean, there's just so many weird things that could happen in a game like this, especially with how poorly coached the Chargers are. So it's definitely not a game that I love. I don't think there's any games this week that I love, but I think there's a little bit of value on the home underdog Jets.
Yeah, good stuff there. And certainly something to keep in mind when we're talking about those two guys that you mentioned, Melvin Gordon, Keenan Allen. Figuring out what to do with them is going to be critical if that game doesn't go as a lot of people would probably guess, in which most people, I assume, are looking at the Chargers and saying this is a spot where they're going to do quite well against the Jets. And you're saying the other side of that coin is completely possible. And looking at the results at New York lately, I think that's completely plausible. Now, Chris, when you take a look at some of these favorites and underdogs out there, is there any particular spot that stands out to you as one where the line might not come to pass the way it's being laid out right now?
Yeah, I think I really expect the Kansas City Chiefs to have a ton of success. I know they're already 10-point favorites. I think this is really another one of these smash spots for them. I think they could put up, well over 30 points in this game. Since offensive coordinator Matt Nagy has taken over the play calling duties from Andy Reid, the Chiefs have scored 31 points, 26 points, and 30 points. They've been over 397 total yards in each of those last 3 games after doing so in only 4 of their first 11 games to start the year when Andy Reid was calling plays, and that's even with a couple of those blow-ups early in the season. So Kansas City has started to right their ship again on offense, and they have a lot of advantages, particularly against the Miami Dolphins. The Miami Dolphins are a team that struggles tremendously against the tight end. They rank 28th in DVOA against tight ends per Football Outsider. So that's a matchup for Travis Kelce to exploit. Miami also just hasn't really been good in any facet of their defense. They rank now, 23rd in schedule adjusted fantasy points to running back. So they've just been 29th in schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed to running back. So this is another spot where Kareem Hunt could get off. Kareem Hunt has been back to really being the workhorse under Nagy. His touches are up by about 3 per game, 23 touches per game in these last 3 games compared to 20 in the first 11. And Hunt also 9 targets last week and, 24 carries. He's been over 24 carries in each of the last 2 weeks. So this is a situation where Kansas City is starting to really use their weapons correctly again after they started to get a little cute and get a little predictable and stale during that middle of the season. Now they have Matt Nagy here calling plays. They have a ton of advantages against this Miami team. And I think that the game is kind of, the over-under isn't too high. When the week started, there was actually some bad weather forecast in Arrowhead. There was going to be a storm. And I spoke about this on the DFS MVP podcast, but on FanDuel, it looks like they actually lowered the prices of some of the members of the Kansas City passing game in anticipation of that storm. But the forecast now just calls for cold weather. It's going to be a little bit below freezing, I think 26 degrees, but there shouldn't be much precipitation or anything like that, maybe a little wind. So this is a game where Kansas City at home, I think, can really dominate. You got Miami traveling to yet another cold destination after going to Buffalo and giving up a lot of production to that Buffalo offense last week. I mean, Tyrod Taylor had a very good game from a fantasy perspective, as did LaShawn McCoy. Charles Clay came through with one of his highest yardage totals of the year as well at tight end. So Kansas City has those same type of players where you have a guy like Kareem Hunt, you have a guy like Travis Kelce, and they can exploit those matchups. And we haven't even talked about somebody like Tyreek Hill or anyone like that. So I like the Kansas. And then also there's the Kansas City defense is another one. They actually averaged 10 DraftKings points per game at home and only 4.0 DraftKings points on the road. They played 7 games at home and 7 games on the road. So Kansas City's defense, special teams also plays a lot better when they are in Arrowhead. And I'm expecting the Dolphins to really struggle this week against Kansas City.
Yeah, nothing on the Dolphins I'm all that interested in, short of maybe like a Jarvis Landry who's going to get 5 catches. That's just going to happen every week at this point. I don't know if he's going to absolutely smash the week. Like you said, there's a lot of reasons that the Dolphins could struggle. Certainly the Kansas City defense, interesting to me, against a Jay Cutler-led offense, like you said, on the road in the cold. Just a lot of reasons to like Kansas City here in this particular situation, and no reason to find any fault in that particular take right there. That's a pretty sound judgment call. Let's go ahead and talk about some offensive players, Warren. Who could get it done for us this week? We've looked at the analytics. You've been staring at your computer screen like a maniac all week trying to find out where we can go from an offensive standpoint this week. Who do we got?
Well, it's probably not going to be popular, but I think if you could try to find, and I'm not going to actually recommend like a specific player here, but one guy that I think, well, actually I will. I changed my mind. I was going to talk about a different game, but I'll just go ahead and go with Christian McCaffrey here for the Carolina Panthers. The Bucs just deactivating guys, putting them on IR left and right. I mean, it's pretty brutal for the injuries that they're dealing with. And I really think, Chris mentioned this game earlier as well in terms of what he thinks on the total. I just think Christian McCaffrey, with the amount of usage that he's been getting, is just in an absolutely great position here to have a ton of success on the ground, in the air. They've been targeting him a ton out of the backfield. He's just doing a lot for this offense right now. He may not replicate exactly everything that he's done in the past, but in a game where they're likely to get the lead, and I think that they will. I mean, I think it's going to be difficult to expect Tampa Bay to do a lot here. I know, Chris, I don't know, maybe Chris, you could touch on this after I finish talking about it, but I'm not so sure that Mike Evans, I mean, he's like their main guy because I think it's Deshaun Jackson's going to be out, but historically at least, Mike Evans has struggled against Carolina. I know he scored like, I think only 2 touchdowns in like 50 attempts, pass attempts over the last like 6 games or so. He just has a very poor catch rate overall. Like, he still produced decent yardage totals in a couple of the games, and obviously he scored 1 touchdown in each of the last. I don't think he scored any in the first meeting, but I just don't know if Mike Evans is really going to dominate, and so I think we're going to have a lot of opportunities for for the Carolina Panthers to be in favorable game script situations where they're going to be able to have a lot of success running the football as well. And the only downside here is, Carolina does play at a slower pace, especially when they've got the lead. I mean, against Aaron Rodgers and the Packers, there was a little touch and go, and they kind of hustled a little bit more. But I really think that there's going to be a situation where they're going to lower their play volume a lot in the second half in this game, and slow this game down a lot. So, but I think Christian McCaffrey just has really solid floor and a pretty nice ceiling in this game.
Warren, you've been watching tape, huh? Well, watch this. Chris, who do you got on offense this week?
Well, first, I'll just to Warren's point about the Mike Evans and the Carolina Panthers. The Panthers, it looks like, they've we kind of think of them as this good defense and a defense that you don't want to go up against. But at the last 6 weeks, their struggles at cornerback have really started to take shape. They've allowed a wide receiver to score at least 15 PPR points in each of the last 6 games, and over the last 4 games, they've allowed a wide receiver to score at least 18 PPR points. They've given up just a ton of production to wide receivers lately. I mean, it's actually borderline ridiculous how in their last 4 games they've given up over 200 yards per game to wide receivers combined, 7 touchdowns to wide receivers over their last 4 games, and over 100 targets. So teams are really going at these corners on the outside for Carolina. James Bradbury, and Darryl Worley have not really fully developed to the point where I think Carolina would have liked. They're both rated outside the top 80 in Pro Football Focus's grades. So Mike Evans, he's really had a down season this year, mainly because his targets are down. Last season, 10.8 targets per game. This season, 8.8 targets per game. So production is going to be down when you decrease targets. We all know that from playing a lot of DFS, is that volume is important for wide receivers. But in this game, I think they're probably just going to force feed him the football. So I'm not too worried about him. But I do agree that Christian McCaffrey is, as usual, in a smash spot. I mean, this is a Bucs defense that's just been decimated at all 3 levels of the field. So, because we know you need players at all 3 levels to be able to contain Christian McCaffrey. It's not just about having a linebacker that can cover. I mean, sometimes they'll split him out wide. You end up with a corner on him. You end up with a safety on him. And you got guys, you need to contain on the D line. And the Buccaneers, I mean, all 3 levels, you just have players banged up, injured, out for the season. So I do agree. I think Carolina is going to have a lot of success on offense. But I also wanted to talk about moving on to a player I think is going to have some success. And Warren kind of alluded to it. It's Keenan Allen in this Jets game as they're hosting as the Jets are hosting the Chargers. Now, Keenan Allen has just been on an absolute tear as of late, averaging 120 yards per game over his last 5 games. And I just talked about how the Carolina Panthers have been very vulnerable to wide receivers, especially number 1 wide receivers. And with the Jets, it's the same story as well. The Jets have allowed a wide receiver, an opposing number 1 wide receiver, to score at least 14 PPR points in 6 straight games, been over 17 points in 5 of those 6 games. And they also rank 32nd dead last in Football Outsiders DVOA versus number one wide receivers, giving up the second most yards per game, 85.4, two number one wide receivers. And it's been a situation where even when the Jets have faced a team like the Carolina Panthers before they got Greg Olsen, and they really only had Devin Funchess, the Jets still gave up 12 targets, 7 catches, 108 yards to him. They gave up 8 catches and 93 yards and a touch to Demaryius Thomas a couple of weeks ago. Another team, the New Orleans Saints, where they really only have Michael Thomas because last week Ted Ginn did not dress, and Michael Thomas, 11 targets, 9 catches, 93 yards, and a touchdown. So it's just really been a struggle for the Jets to contain the opposing top option. They've used Morris Claiborne in shadow coverage a lot. The only time that they really had any success with that was against Julio Jones, which go figure, but pretty much every other game, Claiborne's been on shadow coverage, and he still gave up a lot of production. PFF charged him with a touchdown last week to Michael Thomas, the touchdown in week 14 to Demaryius. So I think, we already have seen this where Phillip Rivers, as Warren alluded to, he's going to force the ball to Keenan Allen. Like we almost can be sure of that because that's just who Phillip Rivers is. And he's a player that, when he gets frustrated, and this could be a situation where, going across the country, playoff hopes hanging in the balance, a team that's probably going to be more competitive in the Jets than the Chargers anticipate. When he gets frustrated, he's going to revert to his old tendencies. We've already seen Keenan Allen have 4 different games this season of at least 9 catches. He's been over 100 yards in 4 of his last 5. And in fact, we have no Antonio Brown on this DFS slate this weekend. Well, Antonio Brown leads the league with 8 100-yard receiving games, and the next player on that leaderboard is Keenan Allen with 6 100-yard receiving games. That is as many as Julio Jones and A.J. Green combined. That's triple the amount of Michael Thomas. So, everything on paper would suggest, and just knowing, how the Phillip Rivers and understanding the Chargers, everything suggests that this is going to be another one of those high-volume games for Keenan Allen, who already has 7 games with double-digit targets this season.
Not a big props guy, but you look at Buster Screen, Morris Claiborne, the 2 guys most likely to see snaps on Keenan Allen. And the question is, will Keenan Allen score a touchdown this week? I might take that one. I think that he's a pretty good bet if anyone on the Chargers is going to score, to be the guy that does it. We heard Warren mention that it's going to be kind of a 2-man show out there. And between Gordon and Allen, I actually kind of like Allen to be the guy who gets in the end zone this week if old man Antonio Gates can somehow find a way to spoil that party. Now let's go ahead and talk about some defensive situations, Warren, where they could cause problems. They could cause some situations where our DFS players might not do so well. What have you identified in week 16?
I think one of the interesting ones is going to be the Jacksonville-San Francisco matchup. If you look at what Jimmy G has faced the last several weeks, he's been playing against some defenses that really struggle and have problems defending the pass. And that's not going to be the case in this game here. When Jacksonville brings their number 1 ranked pass defense out to San Francisco, I think it's going to be a big change for that San Francisco offense. The other thing that San Francisco has struggled with, even though Jimmy G's been so good and so efficient, is they've struggled tremendously with actually converting in the red zone. They've kicked a ton of field goals, which is why Robbie Gould's numbers have been as insane as they've been. But, you look at their ability to score against this very tough Jacksonville Jaguars defense. So I think, this is one of those games where we talked about earlier where some sharper money was going to be coming in, and some sharp money did come in on the San Francisco 49ers. This is a game where the opinion is, in fact, split. But personally, I think that it's going to be a struggle for the San Francisco offense. Goodwin has been a maniac. He's been targeted a ton. He's probably still going to get those targets. He's an Olympic caliber athlete. So maybe he has some good things happen for him, but it is going to be a challenge for them to produce, I think, enough fantasy points for people who are like clamoring for a lot of the 49ers offense in general, at least much more than what they had been. Now, I'll keep this brief because they're playing against the Jaguars, and the Jaguars are a great defense. So this is not like a a big shock to anybody, but I think that there is a considerable amount of the population that looks at Jimmy G and what they've been doing and thinks, wow, Jimmy G has been incredible. I want to keep riding this. And I'm not so sure that this week is a week that they don't come a little bit back to earth with their passing offense. And they've really struggled running the football. Like Carlos Hyde hasn't had the tremendous upside, and he hasn't been targeted in the passing game nearly as much with Jimmy G under center. So I think that there's some definite edges for the Jaguars defense here. Could keep San Francisco's overall point total and production a little bit muted in this game.
Yeah, there's going to be some people out there in these big, $8 contests that are going to want to try to get cute with some contrarian options, some contrarian stacks. Maybe they want to go with the other side, run it back with like a good win with their Keelan Cole or their D.D. Westbrook. I'm not so sure that I'm a big fan of that particular situation, just based on what Warren said this week. The Jaguars are probably a bit overmatched as far as the defensive skill versus the San Francisco offense. I just think that the Jags are likely to dominate, as Warren said. Chris, when you take a look at the defensive situations out there, where have you found a place to avoid or a place to maybe be a little bit skeptical of DFS plays?
I think one for me is Jordan Howard. I think we had a similar situation a couple of weeks ago where Howard and the Bears were a home favorite against a bad 49ers team at the time, I think it was. And, there was a lot of people that were kind of looking for Howard, to have some success just based on that. First of all, just based on being a home favorite going against a bad team. But I expressed some concerns there. And I think there's similar concerns even in this game again, even though Chicago is going against the Cleveland Browns, because if you look at what Chicago likes to do, they like to run the football. They are 31st in the league in pass attempts. And we know that they're just going to run the football as much as they can, or at least that's what they want to do. But then you look at this Cleveland defense, and as bad as the team has been overall, the one area where Cleveland has been able to have success is with their run defense. And, you have them ranking first in run defense DVOA on the year per Football Outsiders, and then you have them also ranking number 2 in run defense success rate, and that's per Warren's site, sharpfootballstats.com. So, we have proof on paper that Cleveland has had a ton of success against the run game, and I think that presents problems not only because Jordan Howard may struggle with his efficiency, but also because really what Jordan Howard needs to put up a good day is he needs a lot of volume for the most part. I mean, a couple weeks ago in Cincinnati, he had 23 carries. That got him to 147 yards and a couple of touchdowns. He had a big game against Baltimore where he had 36 carries, and one against Pittsburgh where he had 23 carries. So if the Bears struggle, they may struggle to, kind of stay ahead of the chains, and it might be a situation where you see a little bit more of Tariq Cohen. They don't have anything to lose at this point in the season by getting Cohen out there some more. So I know it's another one of these home favorite matchups, and Howard seems like kind of a good under the radar play and whatnot. But at least on paper, there's a lot of reason to believe that the spot is not as good as it may appear. And there's so many other stud backs this week that are in spots where even if the matchup on paper isn't great, they're getting a ton of volume and a ton of work in the passing game. Whereas Howard, it's kind of up and down with him in the passing game. He has quite a handful of games with 0 catches and 0 targets, and then a handful more with just 1 catch. So this is a situation where I'm probably going to just pay up a little bit more and get to some of those stud backs than trying to go contrarian with Howard, where we probably need a touchdown or even multiple touchdowns to really pay off that value, because because Cleveland has been very efficient in terms of their run defense.
Yeah, good stuff there. Just hopefully not too many people that interested in taking Jordan Howard, but like I said earlier, with these big tournaments out there, people are going to be trying to find ways to find unique value, and that's just not one where I would highly recommend going to. Let's talk about some places I do think people are going to be going to, though, Chris. I think that there's going to be a reasonable amount of chalk for a decent-sized slate this weekend. Nothing too crazy at the moment, but we'll have to wait and see how the rest of the weekend plays out. looking at Cam as probably the highest owned QB. You got Zeke, Gurley, Gordon, and the Saints probably going to be among the popular higher-priced running backs. You're going to look at a guy like a Mike Evans on DraftKings specifically where he's underpriced. I bet he gets a lot of traction after a good game and nearly a great game last week on public, on a primetime game. You've got Michael Thomas, who's been coming on lately, and we mentioned Keenan Allen earlier. I think all those guys are going to be popular. Gronk, I don't know what I'm going to do if he's not popular. I guess I don't know anything. If the highest scoring, most popular tight end in the league goes off a couple of weeks in a row and he's not chalk, and then I guess I don't know what I'm doing. Greg Olsen came back to life last week. I think he could be getting some run. And Antonio Gates is minimum salary on both sides. So, unfortunately, I think people are going to go there. I'm not so sure I'm sold on that just yet. As far as defenses, Jacksonville, the Chargers, Chicago Bears, Carolina Panthers, lots of options to choose from there on defense. When you take a look at all these options just mentioned, Chris, where have you said to yourself that this is a spot I want to lay my bets in Week 16?
Well, you already know how I feel about Keenan Allen. I think the decision between somebody like Keenan Allen and somebody like Michael Thomas is a difficult one because Michael Thomas has, he's historically had a lot of success against the Atlanta Falcons in that Dan Quinn defense. And, we talked a couple of weeks ago about how you really have to be kind of skeptical when you're looking back at these past matchups because so many different things can kind of change. So, but I do think it's worth noting that in all three meetings with the Atlanta Falcons so far in Thomas's career, he has had at least 11 targets. He's caught at least 7 passes, and he has a touchdown in each of the 3 games. And, it's kind of, Dan Quinn's defense in Atlanta, they've kind of played, they have a certain style where they have some cover 3 concepts. They will play man coverage at a higher rate than some other teams as well. But they tend to kind of have certain staples that we continue to see over and over. One of them has been kind of those passes to the running backs where they will give up a lot of receptions to running backs. Even if it's not always high efficiency in terms of yardage, they're still giving up those catches. And, another one of those things has been just kind of these short routes with Michael Thomas and allowing him to kind of catch the ball. In 2 of the 3 games, he had 10 for 117 a couple of weeks ago in Week 14 against Atlanta. That's only 11.7 yards per catch. And in his first career meeting with them back last year in Week 3, he had 7 for 71. So that's only 10 yards a catch. And then he had a 10 for 156 in between there. But it's a lot more of these just kind of, high percentage, not necessarily down the field action for Michael Thomas. And the Atlanta defense has kind of historically been willing to give those plays up under Dan Quinn. And I think you will probably see that continue this week because the Saints have just been, I think, really good about making sure that their top 3 playmakers are heavily involved, and that being Thomas, Ingram, and Alvin Kamara. And, Michael Thomas has one of the highest target shares in the league in terms of percentage of his team's targets. He's also got one of the highest shares of air yards in the league as well. So I think you're going to see Thomas kind of continue to have success in a high volume role. I think the Jacksonville defense is kind of an interesting situation. I'm not too sure I'm sold on them going on the road facing Jimmy Garoppolo. Not that I think Garoppolo will have a big game, but I don't know if this is necessarily a situation where it's as big of a smash spot for Jacksonville as it would be normally facing a bad team that is on their 3rd or 4th quarterback. I think Jimmy G is actually quite good. He should be able to limit the damage at least a little bit from what Jacksonville is normally able to do. But yeah, I think Michael Thomas is another one. In addition to Keenan Allen, somebody that I'm looking at. And in terms of that Dallas game, I think is interesting is that Ezekiel Elliott's back, and we're all kind of thinking about that Todd Gurley explosion last week against the Seattle defense. We saw Bobby Wagner kind of hobbling around out there. Earl Thomas even called him out after the game, essentially said, "You were hurting us by being out there." Wagner, they expect him to play again this week, but still not 100%, still missing some practices and whatnot. But we also have to remember that the Seattle pass defense is still without Richard Sherman. And, Tyron Smith is going to be a big deal, I think, for the Cowboys, and we're trying to replace him not only in the pass game but in the run game. But Seattle has struggled against the pass. They've allowed a half a yard more per attempt. Completion percentage has gone up 7 points since Sherman went down over these last 5 games. And Dak Prescott and Dez Bryant both have produced at a higher level, in fact, with Ezekiel Elliott in the lineup than they have when he has not been in the lineup in terms of both volume and efficiency. Dak Prescott's yards per attempt goes up about a half a yard with Zeke in the lineup, and Dez Bryant's touchdowns per game is at 0.5 with Zeke in the lineup compared to 0.3 with him out. Dak Prescott's touchdown interception rate is a lot lower with Zeke out of the lineup. So I think, in addition to just Zeke being back and being in a spot where he could have some success against Seattle if they can mitigate the absence of Tyron Smith, I also think that given as Warren said, this Seattle offense, they've had a tough schedule these last few weeks. This is still a Seattle offense that at any given time can erupt. We still have Russell Wilson, still have the receivers, and still have Jimmy Graham in there as well. So if Seattle starts putting up some points, I think Dallas is at some point going to have to throw, and that could be good news for Dak Prescott, for Dez Bryant, and as Warren mentioned, for Ezekiel Elliott in the passing game. His passing game usage is up this season compared to where it was last season. So that's something to keep in mind. I think there was ever a time, kind of hearkening back to that week, I believe it was week 8, where you just had this offensive explosion with Seattle going up against Houston, and you had Deshaun Watson on one side and you had Russell Wilson on the other, and they were just kind of trading blows. I think if there was ever a game this week that could kind of turn into a similar situation, I think it's that game. I think it's this game where it's not just about Ezekiel Elliott. It's going to be about kind of, if Seattle can have some success, it's going to turn into a back and forth affair. And then it's just a matter of, for the Cowboys, what do we do? What do we do if Tyron Smith can't go? How do we kind of learn from our mistakes the last time out when we didn't really give enough help, to our left tackle? If they can kind of use Jason Witten to chip and keep him in the block, and they're sending Dez out and Terrence Williams and guys like that in the routes, Cole Beasley, I think Dallas can have some success in the passing game as well.
Yeah, good stuff. Nice pivot off of the chalk Zeke Elliott onto a lower-owned combination, or at least a discussion of the Dallas passing game. Dez Bryant, Dak Prescott, those are probably good leverage plays out there. There's no guarantee of success in GPP tournaments, no matter who you come off when it comes to leverage, but that is certainly one that makes a lot of sense when you talk about potential advantage over the field. If it's not Zeke who comes through, if it's that passing game, that's interesting for GPP tournaments. Now, Warren, when you take a look at some of those chalkier guys that I mentioned, or maybe someone else that you think might be a little bit popular this week, where have you landed as an interesting spot for DFS?
I would agree with a lot of things that Chris said. I also think, Cam, just with his ability to be multidimensional, run the ball as well. The only real case that there would be touchdowns in that game that wouldn't come from Cam is just on straight handoffs near the goal line, or McCaffrey busting a long run. So I just think Cam just provides a ton of upside there. I don't love it because I'm going up against him in the championships of one of my fantasy leagues. So I'm not loving that element, but I do think he is going to have a great game, and should be in for to provide enough return on your investment to hit him up as what is he, one of the top 5 priced quarterbacks. I think he's well deserving of that.
Yeah, pretty easy call there on Cam. He's going to be really highly owned as quarterbacks go. As far as my projections this week, I have him in the 15% range already, and could get some more steam depending on who else gets on this, as far as how popular of a play he's going to be on DFS on both sites. I do think that it's pretty well justified, though. Expect him to have another good game. When we start talking about under-the-radar situations, Chris, I see who you've got here on the show notes, and I got all kinds of stats on this matchup too, but I'm going to let you talk here. What's going on here with the Los Angeles Rams?
I like Jared Goff. I think he's going to go under the radar. There's just a lot of different reasons to like both his floor and his ceiling in this matchup. First, just on a more basic level, we know that, generally, if you're looking for something in terms of the Vegas line, since this is a kind of a Vegas line-based show, implied point total, and I know Warren has talked about this too, that implied point total is not the real team total that is released a little bit later in the week. But usually they tend to be pretty similar in terms of how they match up. But in terms of implied point total, has a correlation to quarterback fantasy production. And the reason being is that quarterbacks, if a team is scoring points, quarterbacks are generally heavily involved in that because, more than half of a team's yardage is always going to come in the passing game, and usually more, 2/3 of their touchdowns as well. So the Rams implied total is up there, 26.5, 27.5, depending where you look. That's one of the highest on this week's slate of games. But yeah, everyone's really zeroing in only on Todd Gurley. And I think Goff is going a bit overlooked. I mean, he's had multiple touchdown passes in 6 of his last 7 games. And he can give you that kind of high floor, not only just based on his play, but also that of Sean McVay in LA out here just scheming up things and ways to beat these various defenses. And if you look at the Tennessee Titans, I mean, first of all, and not that this is a problem for Todd Gurley, because I think I've been on Gurley since the preseason. I was very high on him, and I think he'll have a great game as he does pretty much every week. But the actual weakness for the Tennessee Titans is their pass defense, not their run defense. They are 24th in Football Outsiders pass defense DVOA, but they rank 10th best in rushing. So in run defense, excuse me. So this is a situation where I'm sure Sean McVay is kind of looking at it and saying, okay, well, what matchups am I going to exploit in the passing game? And I think there are plenty. I mean, first of all, you have one of Tennessee's outside cornerbacks, LaShawn Sims. He just went on the injured reserve, so they're probably going to have to bump Logan Ryan, who's been playing a slot outside, and put Bryce McCain in the slot. That's a downgrade pretty much at both spots. Logan Ryan also banged up with an ankle injury in practice, and that's always good news when you have a cornerback with an ankle issue, because obviously ankle is very important when you're trying to cover wide receivers. So you have a situation where Jared Goff is in this situation with a high implied total. He's in a situation where, pretty much good matchups all the way around now that he has Robert Woods, his most targeted wide receiver, back in the mix. You have a kind of a struggling, a weak Tennessee defense against the pass. And then you have something, Chris, that you actually brought up before the show, which is that Tennessee, and this has been kind of more of a talking point locally in Tennessee. I'm not sure if it's made its way around the national media yet, but Tennessee has been kind of experimenting with more spread offense, some up-tempo, no-huddle kind of things, and they did that a lot in the second half last week against the 49ers, and they had some success, and it looks like from everything we've heard, just as far as the coaches talking to the media and whatnot, that they want to do more of it, and the players are on board. Rashard Matthews just said, when Marcus Mariota's calling the plays, it's a lot better. I'm not sure if he was trying to take a shot at this offensive coordinator or not, but regardless, this is a situation where the Titans could play at a bit of a faster pace than we're used to seeing them. We kind of think of them as this team that just kind of slogs along with DeMarco Murray and Derrick Henry, just kind of slamming them into the line over and over. But this is a Rams team that we've seen this time and time again this season. I mean, I think if we've learned anything this season, it's that when the Rams are in a good spot, they usually smash. Like, it's usually not just, the Rams are in a good spot and they put up 20 points and they win a game. It's like we've seen them put up some pretty high numbers, games against the Giants, against Houston, even Seattle last week, Indianapolis earlier in the season. And, also, if you think about it, Todd Gurley, a lot of his fantasy production has come in the passing game as well. So you're looking at a situation where Jared Goff and Todd Gurley are going to be correlated a lot more than almost any other quarterback and running back, just because Gurley does get targeted so much, and he's so good when he gets targeted at converting those catches into yardage and into touchdowns as well. So I think you have a lot of different avenues for Jared Goff to have success in this game, whether it be the high tempo, whether it be throwing to Gurley, whether it be exploiting the matchups with these Tennessee corners and whatnot. And I think you could use Goff as a leverage play, off of Gurley, who's going to be, I would say, man, probably 5, maybe even 10 times as highly owned as Goff. You could use him as a leverage play there and kind of build some Rams passing game stacks instead. Or you could, as I mentioned, stack Goff with Gurley. And if the Rams put up another one of these smash spots like we've seen them do time and time again this season, they've actually scored 40 points on 4 different occasions and 30 points on 5 more occasions, then you may just have access to 4 or 5, maybe even 6 touchdowns if you're stacking Goff and Gurley. So I really like Goff this week. I think he's a high floor, high ceiling option.
Yeah, or maybe Tennessee will actually be good when they run spread. Marcus Mariota obviously used to run one of the fastest offenses in history in Oregon, and now they're in this prison where they've got him running this 2 tight end nonsense, this absolute complete crap fest that we're looking at in Tennessee. This freaking, what do they call it? The exotic smash mouth. Get it out of here. Let's get him in the spread formation and show what this guy can do. Get some of these talented receivers involved. Let's get Delaney Walker involved. How about him? He's pretty good, right? We could actually see a really high scoring game here if Tennessee's able to get it done. You mentioned a couple of these cornerbacks. Adoree Jackson charged with 6 touchdowns per Sports Info Solution, tied for 3rd worst in the NFL. He's a young player, but he has shown the ability to get toasted for touchdowns at time. Now, Tennessee not necessarily known as a team that gives up a lot of explosive passing plays with a Dick LeBeau defense. I do think that the Rams have the tools to get it done methodically, and they certainly can get it done in 10-yard chunks just as easily as they get it done in 20, 25-yard chunks. So I do like this game. I wait every single week for the spot that I'm going to overdo and get too much exposure to and get burnt when it doesn't come through. This could be that spot, Chris. I do love it after our conversation here. Warren, what do you got here as far as under-the-radar plays?
Yeah, and I'll just to throw on to that, I would love to see Tennessee do that. I'm just not fully convinced that they'll overhaul things offensively. I mean, they are they're close to the playoffs right now, but at the same time, if I was there calling plays, helping coach a team, I would absolutely work in a lot more of what's been working and been more efficient for us, which could be the tempo. But I would love to see them make an intelligent decision with that offensive coaching staff. That would be the underdog choice for them to make an intelligent coaching decision and do that. So we'll see how that one plays out. I'm pulling for you guys though, because I hope they make the right decision and use a little bit more up tempo. The guy, I was on the fence with this one. Between 2 guys who I both think are sort of undervalued running backs in really good situations. Joe Mixon continue, I'm assuming he's playing, he had a concussion. I think he's coming back this week. I think he's fine to play. Assuming that that's the case, we continue to find value going against the Detroit Lions run defense. Now, it didn't work out so well for us last week when we did the same exact maneuver and tried to get on Jordan Howard. He did not have a very good game. That team they're within 10 points, and they throw 3 interceptions, a couple of which were down inside the red zone. It was just, I have no idea why they allowed Trubisky to kind of spread things out as much as they did and choose that approach. But at any rate, I think that there's going to be opportunities. A lot of people are thinking that, at least in the sports betting side of things, some on the sharper side, that this is going to be like a Marvin Lewis send-out party, that they're going to really rally the troops. I don't know. I think Vontaze Burfict actually practiced yesterday on Thursday after watching practice on Wednesday and having missed time before that with his concussion that he sustained against the Pittsburgh Steelers. So if they produce a full-out effort, and you know how teams can play emotionally, and obviously Detroit's in this must-win game, but if Cincinnati can keep it somewhat close, Mixon has some decent upside, I think, based on his price point. Another guy that I was debating against, but I just don't know at this stage in the season what the team's going to do between Booker and C.J. Anderson. But I think C.J. Anderson has a ton of potential against this Redskins run defense. Because in part of the reasons for the injuries on the Redskins offense, as ironic as that sounds, Redskins, like the running backs, I think they lost another guy. I was reading to one of the running backs, like some backup guy, to a broken hand in practice yesterday fielding a punt or a kickoff. So they actually have only one guy who's like legitimately possibly playing after P. Ryan didn't practice the last couple of days because I think a groin injury. So, I mean, if P. Ryan's not able to go, I think it's Capri Bibbs, and that's about it. They literally have no other running backs if P. Ryan can't go that are actually on the roster and could play. I mean, I don't care could play badly, just like physically they cannot play due to injuries. They're going to be throwing the ball a ton, and that's going to provide upside in terms of clock stoppages for Denver when they do have the ball. It's also the most difficult thing on the Broncos to attack. They could have a little bit of success to keep Denver a little bit more competitive, but C.J. Anderson going up against this run defense, who really hasn't faced a great run offense. If you look at who the Redskins have faced, last week they played the Cardinals, who are without like a number of their running backs. The week before that, they got kind of destroyed by the Chargers in their run game, and of course they allowed a lot to Dallas. And Dallas, of course, doesn't even have Ezekiel Elliott at that point in time back in Week 13. And before that, they played the Giants, who really don't have much of a solid run game there either. So a limited passing game for the Redskins, but a game that will have to pass a lot. I think the other team, in this case Denver, will have a lot of rushing upside. It's just a matter of how much of that does Booker steal away, and that's one thing that I'm not positive about. But of course they've had extra rest, right? They played last Thursday in Indianapolis, so Denver a little bit extra time to rest up C.J. Anderson, have him ready to go in this game. But with them not having anything to play for and Booker maybe being their guy next year, I have a feeling, but it'd require a little bit more reading to see what the coach wants to do here in terms of working Booker more into it. But those two guys, C.J. Anderson or Mixon, I think offer some decent upside based upon their matchups this week.
Yeah, great stuff there, Warren. And great job, as always, on the show, guys. Wanting to wish you guys both a happy holidays, no matter what you are all celebrating here in the show and throughout the listening audience. I really do truly appreciate you taking the time to listen. You can catch Warren on sharpfootballstats.com and sharpfootballanalysis.com, all kinds of interesting information from the betting market side of thing on Sharp Football Analysis, and certainly from the football stat side of thing. That's just a tremendous resource he puts out there for free, and it's just absolutely amazing. Kudos to you for making that site, Warren. Absolutely love it. Of course, you can find Chris Raybon on 4for4. He's the senior DFS editor there, and they've got just all kinds of advanced information from a football standpoint that I think you will love if you check them out. So I'm certainly all in favor of you going over there to check out what they're doing. And, of course, you can see what we've got at RotoGrinders, rotogrinders.com/premium. We've got all the sports, not just football. You can take advantage of us on a trial basis and see if you like it. I'm pretty convinced that if you do so, you're going to find something to like about that. That's going to do it for the show. Happy holidays, everyone. For Warren, for Chris, I'm Chris. We'll be back for our final week in Week 17.